Hi everyone, it's time for the next instalment of Mr. Penguin and the Fortress of Secrets. Chapter 25. The Great Escape. Bang! Mr. Penguin sat up on a pile of rubble and dusted off his hat. He was looking a bit battered about the edges, but thankfully it would be okay. His ears were buzzing like an angry wasp's nest, and he was covered in dirt. Colin clambered out from behind some broken bricks and handed Mr. Penguin the gigantic diamond he'd recovered. Holding it in his flippers, Mr. Penguin marvelled at the gigantic gem. Even in the smoke-filled room, it seemed to sparkle and shine with a light coming from within. It must be worth a fortune, Mr. Penguin thought, and he'd been wandering around with it in his bag. He stashed it away with his magnifying glass that Colin had pulled out from under a cage. It now had a huge crack across the glass. "What do we do now?" Mr. Penguin asked Colin. His beak was all dry and dusty, and his voice came out all croaky like a frog's. He wanted a nice cup of tea, a fish finger sandwich, and a good sleep in his hammock back in his city village gloom. But that was completely impossible at the moment. "We need to get out," said Colin's pad. And Mr. Penguin agreed. But how? They'd have to pick their way out of this rubble to find Liesl. Mr. Penguin doubted she'd been able to fix the cuckoo plane. He'd made a dreadful mess of it when he'd crashed it, so it looked as if they would be stuck up this mountain forever. He groaned loudly and hid his entire head down the neck of his jumper, wishing someone else was there to sort out all this kerfuffle. Then he heard the hidden door in the fireplace creak and felt Colin poke him on the belly. Mr. Penguin groaned again. Whatever was happening, he wasn't sure he had the energy to face it. He burrowed even further down inside his jumper. "Is he okay?" said a voice. Mr. Penguin's head shot out from his polo neck. "Liesl!" he cried, and he sat up and gave his friend a hearty hug about the knees. Besides him, Colin was stashing away his pad. It said, "He's fine. He's just having one of his moments." But Mr. Penguin didn't see that. He was too excited to see Liesl. She was covered in smudgy oil stains and standing with her hands on her hips. "How did you get here?" asked Mr. Penguin. "I heard all the odd noises coming from the fortress and thought I'd better hoof it up here and see if you were okay," she explained. "But the snakes," said Mr. Penguin wide-eyed. "Did they bite you?" Liesl laughed. "No, not at all. Quite the opposite, in fact. I found the front door locked, but then discovered a little, old, manky wooden door at the back of the fortress, covered in snow. As I tugged it open, snakes came flying out like deflating birthday balloons, all looking terrified. They slithered off and didn't even look at me." Mr. Penguin was very relieved, and at 900 miles an hour, told her everything that had happened since they'd left her. "We're very glad to see you," he said once he'd finished. "Did you manage to fix the cuckoo plane?" Liesl's brow crinkled. "No, I'm afraid," she said sadly. "It's too badly broken. I wondered if there might be a plane here in the fortress we could escape in. but I haven't seen one." Her voice trailed away. Mr. Penguin groaned again. They really were trapped on the mountain. He hoped Edith and the people of Schneedorf-on-the-Peak would organise a rescue mission, but that could take days, and his stomach was already turning itself upside down and inside out with hunger. The only thing I did find was an enormous basket thing covered in a sheet. That was just before I heard the explosion and came running to see if you were okay." "A basket? Covered in a sheet? That isn't helpful at all," thought Mr. Penguin. "Now isn't the time for a picnic." But out came Colin's pad. "I think that might be a hot air balloon," it said. Mr. Penguin snapped his flippers. "Of course! Dr. Mesmero hadn't used a plane to get here. She'd snuck up silently one night in a hot air balloon." Mr. Penguin leapt up, did a little dance of happiness on the rubble. They were saved. But his giddiness didn't last long. A great blast of wind rattled around the chamber, toppling bricks from the roof into the room. A large crack zigzagged down one of the walls that remained of the roof, started to quiver above them. "Quick," said Liesel. "We need to leave pronto before this whole place falls down around us. I'll get the balloon inflated and you get all the hamsters." She darted off, hurtling over the bricks and machinery before disappearing back down the tunnel behind the fireplace. The hamsters! Gordon, in all the explosions and excitement, Mr. Penguin had almost, but not quite, forgotten them. He jumped to his feet and waddled over to the cages, wafting away the smoke with his flippers. All the hamsters were blinking in a stunned fashion. Whatever hypnotic spell they'd been under, it had been broken. They were looking around them, trying to make sense of where they were and what they were doing. Everyone except Gordon. He was still trying to work out how to use the exercise wheel and falling off it every few seconds. Mr. Penguin reached in and pulled his friend out. He gave him a quick hug. "Silly old pigeon," he said, as he popped Gordon on the top of his head, where he knew he'd feel at home. Then Mr. Penguin and Colin unlocked all the cages and helped the rodents out. They got them lined up nice and orderly behind Colin, ready to scamper off to the hot air balloon. They looked like they were going on a school trip. Mr. Penguin took Gordon from his head and tucked him safely under his flipper, just in case he decided to go flapping back into his cage. "Let's go," said Colin's pad, but Mr. Penguin was dithering and shuffling his feet. "Question mark," said Colin. Mr. Penguin nibbled his beak. "It's Dr. Mesmero," he said. "We shouldn't just leave her here. She could be hurt." "But the roof is going to fall on our heads at any moment." Colin scribbled on his pad, whilst trying to stop a hamster from chewing the end of his pen. "I'll be 2 flaps of a flipper," said Mr. Penguin. After some waddling about and shifting of things, he found Dr. Mesmero's notebook under a tangle of fizzing wires and stashed it away in his satchel. He discovered Dr. Mesmero sitting against a wall, staring into space. Her blonde hair stood bolt upright, and her face was covered in thick black dust. Are you okay, Dr. Mesmero?" said Mr. Penguin. No answer. So he tapped her on the head with a flipper. Then he waggled a finger in front of her face. She still didn't respond. She still didn't blink. Then Mr. Penguin noticed the very faint swirls in her eyes. "Great tuna streaks," he cried. "She's hypnotised herself. It must have happened when the hypnotron beam bounced off the diamond and walloped her directly in the fizzog. Well, thought Mr. Penguin, I definitely can't leave her here. She'll turn into a block of ice in minutes. That's if the roof doesn't fall in and clonk her on the head first. Mr. Penguin wasn't sure what he could do with her once they got back to the village, but he was bringing her with him anyway. Clearing his throat, Mr. Penguin said in his best, most sensible voice, "Follow me." And like magic, she did. He shuddered. She'd do whatever he wanted. That might sound fun, but he knew that sort of power was incredibly dangerous, especially in the hands of people like Dr. Mesmero. He led her across the room and down the tunnel. Liesl had got the hot air balloon inflated, and Colin was helping the last of the rescued rodents into the basket. Looking very sternly at the giddy ones, jostling at the back, Mr. Penguin sat Dr. Mesmero down in a corner of the basket, and Liesl untied the ropes holding the balloon to the ground. As gracefully as a basket full of rodents, 2 humans, a spider and a rather portly penguin, with a pigeon dressed as a hamster tucked under his arm, could move, the adventurers rose into the air and floated gently across the valley to safety. They were hardly above the clouds when below them the whole of the fortress roof fell in, and the entire building crumbled to dust. That's the end of chapter 25. I hope you enjoyed that.